Hello and welcome back. Now that we've set up our form in Codeigniter, we're going to go ahead and add some validation. I made a few changes to the form that we made in the last video, and all I did was add an email address form field and a second password box that's password confirm. You can see the form here. We just have that to make sure you've typed in the same password twice, and we've added the email address in case we want to send a newsletter. Let's go to our users control. And you can see the function we have to register as it is. There's no validation there whatsoever. I could keep registering the same username and then we'd have multiple records in the database. It'd be a disaster. So we're going to use a library called form validation. We've already used the form helper, but now we need to use the library for the validation because this stores all the validation. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a configuration array before we initialize it. And this is going to have arrays within arrays. And basically each array within that array is going to have all the validation built in it. Remember, it's good to use Codeigniter's user guide. If we go to codeigniter.com into the user guide and we go ahead and look at the form validation class, you can see it has everything here. We're going to be going over a lot of this, but there are a lot of them that we're not going to go over because there's just so many different options. So what we do is we first tell it what field we're going to do the validation for. So the first one is username. Then we add a label. And that is just whatever you want the label to be, because the label on the form might not be the same as the name of the field. This is the same one, I'm just going to add a capital U. Then here's the great part. We add the rules. So there's a lot of different rules that we can do. The first one we're going to do is we're going to trim it. And you're probably familiar with this with PHP. The second is going to be obvious. We want this to be required. And you can see all I'm doing is adding a line in between each validation rule. So what else might we want to do? Well, maybe we want the minimum length to be 3 characters long, because we don't want them to have too short of a username. That's all you would do. The last one we want to do is we want to make sure that the username is a unique entry. So we would just put is unique, then we say users.username. It's actually going to check that the username column is unique in the users table. This is great. If you've made a lot of forms where you've had to register, all the validation can take forever to add. This is very simple. Then let's go ahead and add validation for password. So you can see I have an error here. I shouldn't have that semicolon. It should be a comma if anything. We do the field again. Then we add the label. And this one we don't need as much validation to it. But we want to trim that as well. We need that required. And I want it so the minimum length is 5 characters. You could also add a max length. Maybe your database has a varchar 255, and after you encrypt that, you just can't have a password that's too long. So maybe you want it to be 15 characters at the most. I'm not going to add that because I have it so you can have a long password if you want. Then let's do password 2, which is password confirmed, and this is just about the same validation as the regular password. But we want to make it so both passwords are the same. So we're going to say matches password. That's all you need to do. So it's just going to make sure that both passwords are the same in the boxes. The user type, all we really want is to make it required. And then lastly, we have the email address. So we want to trim that, make it required, but we also want to make sure that it's unique in the database. And then we also want to make sure that it's a valid email address. So how do we do that? All you do is valid_email. This will save you so much time. It really is my favorite thing that Codeigniter does. So now we have our array there, but what do we do next? We need to load the library. And we could put this in autoload, but we only use this in a few pages. Then we're going to set the validation rules that we just made. So we've set the rules, but now we need to actually validate it. So we have to run it essentially. So I'm going to do an if statement. So if this form validation run equals false. So if some errors came up, then I'm going to add in the data array the validation errors. Then we want to go ahead and register the user. Then we need to update the view to show these errors, and that's just a simple if statement. So if there's errors, then display the errors. Let's go ahead and test all the validation out. I'm just going to go ahead and do nothing and click register. You can see usernames required, passwords required, email, user type, that's all required. It didn't say that the passwords didn't match because they actually did match because they're both blank. But it didn't say that email isn't valid, and that's because at the very first sign of it not being valid, it stops running the rest of the validation, so it saves on the footprint. So I'm going to put in a user, and let's do user type as user, and we can see have our JavaScript, and let's click register. You can see the username must contain a unique value, but now we have to enter everything in again. So if we go back to our arrays, we can set a value, and what we want to do is do set underscore value, and we put the name of the field. This is going to set the value if you previously entered something, and otherwise it's going to be blank. As you can see when I refresh, the user's there, so we're going to do the same with the rest. So I've added that to email. I wouldn't do that to the passwords. Now what about this drop down? It works a little bit different. Set value is not going to work by default, and the reason why is we have to add an ID here first. When we add the ID of user type, then it will work. The set value grabs an ID, and the form drop down right here is just for the name. So if we add an ID of user type, then we can change this to set value. Now you can see it selected it for us. What if we wanted it so that if you just got to the page, that it had a different default instead of it being blank? All you do is you add a comma and then you put in whatever you want. So I could put admin. So by default it will be admin. So if I go to the page without anything, you can see now it selects admin by default. We can also test an email that's fake. It's going to tell us that it has to be a valid email address, and I didn't have both the passwords being the same. If I have only a couple characters, you can see it has to be at least 5 characters in length. We've now seen the validation that Codeigniter can do. It's my absolute favorite part of Codeigniter. I highly recommend that you take a look at the user guide to see all of the different validation that Codeigniter has to offer. Our next video, we're going to go ahead and upload files because we probably want to have that with the post.